as far as the amount at once, there's a ceiling on lipolysis, which he's not accounting for here. And it's much lower than most people think. And this is why a lot of people are putting unnecessary stress on themselves and wasting money and taking too much GH. As you can see here in the following study assessing the pharmacokinetics and acute lipolytic actions of GH. What's up, guys? Derek, moreplatesmoredates.com. Today I'm going to be reacting to and correcting, well, not reacting to because I've already watched it, but correcting a handful of things I heard in the Fouad Abiad podcast with Mike at the research station that I felt just need to be clarified. I've received several messages about, covering this. Let me just preface this by saying I don't disagree with everything this guy says. Like, there are a lot of things that I'm on the same page about. His overarching message seems to be harm reduction, lowering dosages, all good stuff at the end of the day. It's just some of the claims that are made are far-fetched and incorrect. So that's what I kind of wanted to address here. The first point was let's see, I'm going to play the clip. So he basically elaborates on how the body can only handle 125 milligrams per shot.
You don't need that shit. Your body can't even use it. Your body's capacity is about 125 milligrams a day of testosterone. If you go to my website, the research station, click on research, there's a blog called Blended TRT. I actually have sourced studies with DOI numbers showing that the body can only manage about 125 milligrams per shot.
He's basically saying you don't need to take, or you shouldn't be taking more than 125 milligrams of testosterone per shot because your body can't use it. So I'm not sure if he misinterpreted the study that he's actually referring to back his claim, but if you look at the study, effects of different doses of testosterone on gonadotropins, 25-hydroxy vitamin D3, and blood lipids in healthy men. This is the study he's using to back his point here. The guys in the study were given one shot of 125 milligrams, 250 milligrams, or 500 milligrams of testosterone, and levels were assessed at day 4 and 14. So day 4 obviously is more indicative of what's going on because by day 14, a lot of the hormone has cleared the system. So you can clearly see that serum testosterone levels are much higher in the 500 milligram group than the 250 and higher than the 125 group. So like, your body can use it just fine. It's increasing testosterone levels in a dose-dependent manner. It's just the side effect profile, though. Like, I can agree and get on board with microdosing. Like, I do the exact same thing for my TRT. I feel that's a far more effective way. Well, it's proven to be a more effective way to maintain stable blood serum concentrations, and anything above a few hundred milligrams of test, I believe, is just a waste anyways when there's more tissue-selective alternatives. But the fact is, your body can use it just fine. If you did pen more than, 125 milligrams at once, like, does the risk profile and, incidence of side effects increase dramatically as you increase the dose? Yeah, obviously. But I mean, it doesn't mean your body can't use it or process it. So there are studies to show what graded doses of testosterone yield in healthy men even, and you can see that a blatant dose dependent increase in lean muscle mass. So I don't know why he's saying at 125 your body just can't use it anymore. Like, that's not the case. I'm going to play the next part of the clip here to make it before I jump into my next point.
If you inject 400 milligrams in a single shot, your body's going to use a portion of that. But what you need to understand is, after you get past 125 milligrams, your HDLs begin to crash and your LDLs rise. Your body has a natural preset based off of genetics. When your LDLs get to a certain point, it just immediately, it starts a bile response and starts dumping lipids. So all of those sterols that you just injected, a large portion of them, and somewhere between 20 to 60%, depending on how much is built up in your system, begins to dump into the bile. So your feces start to get yellow, a little bit runny.
What I want to know is, how come I feel better, or maybe not feel better, but feel better in the gym when I go from 750 to 1250?
Mental. Probably some of it's mental, but also you have to remember, because you're taking those moderate esters, you're not plowing into it. You're just stepping up and staging, and your body's already dumping anyway because it's not going to let you use that much test anyhow. So let's say you're taking 1250 versus 750, right?
Yeah.
Well, 750 is well above that 125 mark, and so is 1250. The 750 you dump this much, the 1250 you dump this much. Now you're actually at 750, which is where you wanted to be in the first place. So now you feel good. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I'm getting more though.
Oh, you're getting more.
Sorry, you cut out there.
You're getting more, but you're dumping more. So you're getting what you wanted to get.
Yeah.
But your body's now dumping more. So you're putting more strain on your liver. You're putting more strain on your kidneys. It'll lead to kidney stones, kidney disease. It'll lead to hyperlipidemia, fatty liver disease. Yeah. All kinds of stuff starts to happen when you updose to hit that sweet spot, which is really just you go to a certain point. You're like, okay, I feel good, but I need to go up because I'm not getting my results. So you go up. You're like, I'm not there. And then you go up again. You're like, now I'm there. Well, okay, up here you're there, but your body jumped 30% to 40%. So actually, you're here. And when you were here, your body dumped 20 to 30%. So actually you're back down here at the 500 where you started in the first place.
So I think the claim he's making is more so based on the fact that the 125 milligram group didn't experience any effect on their lipid profile in the study. But like, you have to take into account that's one shot you're evaluating. So I can show you bloods on daily shots as low as 15 milligrams a day of test with suppression of HDL. A single shot is not indicative of what will happen over several years of TRT use, and especially not supraphysiological androgen use in a bodybuilding context. So there's a dose-dependent impact on lipids when exogenous anabolic androgenic steroids are present in general. But to say your body can't use anything above 125 milligrams of test per shot just is ridiculous. Like, I don't think you should administer more than that, but your body is not going to just dump it and trash it like he's asserting. The more you use, the worse it is for your lipids, the more, aromatization you're going to get because you're not splitting up your administration frequency. The lower the incidence of side effects would be with the same weekly dose had you split it up into more frequent administrations. Yes, I agree on that entirely. It's just the point he's trying to elucidate here, I feel like it's completely wrong, because it's not like your body can't build more muscle once you pass 125 milligrams in a shot. If you were on cycle and you're using 500 milligrams of test per week and you did it all at once, is that optimal for the way you could administer it to reduce side effect profile? No, it's like the worst way you could do it, but you're still going to get more muscle mass than you would out of 125 milligrams once a week. Moving on to the next point.
And I know some guys are like, well, how do you feel about the sub-Q test injections?
I was going to ask you that.
I've read the science of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of schools of thought on that. It affects and adjusts the ester and how fast and rapidly it works with your body. It's not as stable. I don't like it. I think that you retain more water. Plus, you have to remember that androgens and estrogens store in your fat tissue. So if you're injecting test into your fat tissue, you're just getting a big old lump of test right there, and it's staying, and it's not coming out.
Okay, so getting into the point about sub-Q injections not being stable, I don't think anybody doing high volume should be doing sub-Q simply because the amount of oil is going to be too much to load sub-Q. Like, you're going to end up with lumps, you're going to end up with subpar absorption. But if you're using micro amounts of volume like myself for TRT, sub-Q is not only more tolerable with less scar tissue buildup, but it's the exact same stability in terms of blood serum concentrations. Like, I'm going to post a study here. Serum testosterone concentrations remain stable between injections in patients receiving subcutaneous testosterone. So our data demonstrate that when testosterone cypionate is injected subcutaneous at a weekly interval, mean serum levels remain stable and within the normal range. A similar pattern of mean serum testosterone levels has been reported with weekly intramuscular injections of testosterone. This study backs up that the stability is just fine. In addition to that, another study, pharmacokinetics, safety, and patient acceptability of subcutaneous versus intramuscular testosterone injection for gender-affirming therapy. In this one, testosterone values from the last 3 weeks of sub-Q administration were slightly higher than those after intramuscular injection, and a finding that suggests that when switching from IM to subcutaneous, slightly lower subcutaneous dose may achieve testosterone levels comparable to those produced by the intramuscular route. Prior to the start of the study, some of our colleagues suggested that a subcutaneous dose 10 to 15% smaller than the IM dose would produce similar effects. A comparison of the final 3 subcutaneous trough levels with the steady state IM levels suggests that some patients may indeed require less tests to achieve their therapeutic goals. The only adjustment noted in testosterone dosage was lowering of the subcutaneous dose from 60 to 50 milligrams in one participant because of the above target test levels. So, all participants self-injected and the actual dose may have varied depending on residual testosterone in the syringe or backflow from the injection site. However, these potential confounders reflect real-world conditions and render the results more generalizable to clinical practice. So, touching on this, first of all, the study saying that sub-Q actually results in more test for the same dose than IM, and the very likely reason, like they allude to it in the study that it may be because of residual testosterone in the syringe. And I think this is definitely the case. And this is why I would even reinforce that sub-Q for TRT, people on TRT is even more of a better option because you don't have to account for this backflow in the syringe. When you're using an intramuscular pin, you have a 1 inch or a 1.5 inch pin, and you have this giant barrel. You probably notice you lose up to 0.1 milliliters every single shot. At least I did when I used to do it this way. And when you switch to an insulin pen, you'll notice that you don't lose anything. So if you're pinning only, 150 milligrams of test per week for TRT, and you lose 0.1 milliliter per shot, which is, 20 to 25 milligrams, depending on, your ester, the concentration, etc. That's a lot for your weekly dose. So it just reinforces the notion that the accuracy of intramuscular shots is going to be lower because it's harder to predict what's actually going to come out of the thing. In addition to that, you're creating way more scar tissue by using a giant harpoon when you don't need to. In addition to that, stable hormone serum concentrations are achieved just the same, regardless if you're doing it IM or sub-Q. So, I disagree with what he's saying pretty much. In terms of high volume, I wouldn't do sub-Q just because it's not feasible at all. As far as obviously sub-Q, everyone thinks belly fat immediately when they think sub-Q. I don't think that's a good place to put anything oil-based. Just as a side note, I think that TRT the only thing that should be administered into actual belly fat is water-based substances. So while you technically can use body fat, the issue is that the sensitivity to solvents can cause welting, and belly fat with hormones suspended in oil typically is not going to be super agreeable for most people. So I don't do my sub-Q shots in my belly fat anyways. So as far as him talking about how it creates like a lump or it contains like a deposit that doesn't get absorbed correctly, like that's not where I would pin anyways. It would be ventroglute is my go-to for sub-Q shots, and the location of administration is no different than what it would be with IM shots. It's just the depth is different, and it allows me to get away with a much smaller pin and get more stable blood serum concentrations by allowing me to maintain daily administration frequency. Okay, so getting on to his next point here, he talks about how, SARMs are all fake because they're patented and they're protected by patent law, and they're all abandoned. Almost all of them are abandoned in clinical trials.
These patents so they can protect their intellectual property. Otherwise, they're not going to produce anything. Yeah. So all the selective androgen receptor modulators that have yet to be abandoned, which is only a few at this point in clinical trials, they are all protected by patent. Even the ones that are abandoned are protected by patent because they intend to remodulate them and use them again. Okay. So what China did was China was like, oh, these are not classified as a steroid in the United States, so we can make a whole lot of money. So what are we going to do? We're going to change it to the testosterone, then move the molecule around like this, and then, it's still SARM, it still work. And it does. It does still work.
Can you explain that? Can you explain that in normal language? So they added a molecule.
So they're with every hydrocarbon. A hydrocarbon is just a basic compound that exists for organic chemistry. Every hydrocarbon has methyl groups and aldehydes and alcohol groups and all these different functional groups attached to.
Yeah.
In the case of a SARM, in most cases, they plugged multiple methyl groups onto the hexagonal benzyl that you'll see, which will be just the hydrocarbon itself.
Yeah.
They plugged multiple methyl groups on that to change the structure, and now it's no longer.
So it's not. So it's not actually a SARM. It's whatever they created.
Right, but your body pops those methyl groups off just like it does with like a prescription medication. You take a prescription medication and it pops that apart, and it takes the piece it's going to use and sends it through the body.
Yeah.
It does the same thing with the SARMs. It pops these little pieces off, and then it takes that hydrocarbon in it, and it's like, well, I don't know what this is, but okay, and it throws it through the body, and it goes around. And the thing about these SARMs is there's absolutely zero science on these black market SARMs. There's no science.
Yeah.
Like there's only the clinical science, but the clinical science cannot possibly reflect the stuff these people are taking because they are not chemically identical.
In addition to that, he's saying that the chemical structure of the SARM sold is not, an actual SARM. It's just some sort of like chemical alteration of a testosterone molecule, essentially, and sold as SARMs. First of all, I'm going to get into the clinical trials on SARMs and which are abandoned and what aren't. So they're not all abandoned. Austrian was in phase 3. I don't think it's even going to make it through personally, though, either. It's probably going to be abandoned. Maybe not. I don't know. But it's having trouble reaching its target endpoints. With that said, LGD 4033 phase 2 trial started October 30th, 2015, completed in March 2018. Clinical trial was 12 weeks long, involved 108 patients. I'm not going to get too in-depth with the study itself because I've done this, elaborated on the study many times before, especially my LGD post, which was extremely long, so I don't want to delve into it too much. But basically, at the end of the day, LGD produced significant increases in lean body mass and appendicular lean mass following 12 weeks of daily dosing in all subjects. A consistent dose response was observed across all primary and secondary efficacy measures, and it exhibited encouraging safety and tolerability, and there were no drug-related serious adverse events in the study. And it's looking to go into phase 3 now. So that's under Viking Therapeutics as VK5211. Going into PF 06260-414. It was a phase 1 study done on it in 72 healthy adult men. It was found to be well tolerated. GSK 2881078 by GlaxoSmithKline. Was in a phase 1 study and produced a dose-dependent increases in muscle mass, and the compound was well tolerated as well. It's now in a phase 2 trial for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease muscle weakness, and it has an approximate completion date of December 5th, 2019. And in addition to that, RAD 140 is in recruitment right now for its first phase 1 trial. So they're not all abandoned. We're just getting to the point of narrowing down ones and creating more efficacious ones that are actually going to hit their efficacy measures and be able to be deployed in a clinical practice and be worth actually approving. As better SARMs get developed, more are going to make it through. And right now, the fact that even at this primitive stage of this new development of these compounds, we're already having stuff that's producing good endpoints and with high levels of tolerability with low side effect profiles, lower than that of traditional anabolic steroids. I think that's pretty good. So with that said, obviously things can only get better from here. So something to keep an eye on and something to not completely disregard as useless. Like, most people on the polar opposite side of the spectrum are in the steroids only camp versus SARMs only camp. Like, there is a middle ground here in terms of what has promise in terms of a clinical setting for offsetting musculoskeletal degenerative disease and whatnot. So as far as the structure of the SARMs themselves, he's talking about how they're chemical alternatives of testosterone, and most people get these confused. The fact is when testosterone was first, used in a clinical setting, the reason new steroids were developed was not for bodybuilders to use. It was to find more tissue selective efficacious alternatives that are better than testosterone with less androgenicity, so then women, children, and men could use it without experiencing significant negative outcomes and androgenic side effects. So these steroidal SARMs are the same things that guys are using that they're just calling anabolic androgenic steroids, things like 19-NORs. These are technically classified as steroidal SARMs in a lot of the clinical data. Things like trenbolone, things like trestolone. These are commonly referred to as steroidal SARMs as far as the chemical structure of them, those are the ones that have those alterations and are derived from testosterone that he's mentioning, 19-nortestosterone. However, the non-steroidal SARMs, these have nothing to do with that. And I don't know why they're being lumped into this category by him, but the structural modifications of anti-androgens are what was done to create many of the first novel SARMs. So things like bicalutamide, hydroxyflutamide, these things were used as the chemical backbone of these SARMs, and then they were altered in order to create selective androgen receptor modulators, at least some of the most primitive ones, and they were used as the basis of selective androgen receptor modulator research. So the chemical structure of non-steroidal SARMs, which is what we're actually referring to here, is completely different than what he's referring to. So he's referring to the actual steroidal SARMs that are actually used by bodybuilders already. The non-steroidal ones are the ones we're talking about here in a literal, what SARMs are seen as. These are the non-steroidal ones, and these are ones that don't have anything to do with testosterone whatsoever. Getting into his patent law thing, when it comes to patent laws, the overseas manufacturers that the underground market derives from in the first place, they don't care about patents, nor is it relevant whatsoever, in my opinion. Like, for example, this is a patent for a compound called CB0301. This is a topical anti-androgen that is in clinical development for hair loss prevention. So patents have been granted in the US for this and expire in 2023 and 2030. Now, I'm able to go on a website and buy this for myself from a company selling it to people for research purposes. And I'm also able to get it third-party tested myself and see that it is, in fact, the compound it's supposed to be, and then proceed with research knowing it is what it's supposed to be, proven via mass spec. Like, it's not very hard to find a company that sells this stuff and then go get it third-party tested with an accurate, way to assess if it's high purity or not, and then, proceed with from there. Like, it's not, I don't see where the confusion is in this part. Like, it's not like these Chinese manufacturers are going by the book in the US in terms of what you're supposed to be doing by pharmaceutical standards. So
these carbons are bouncing through the body. They're binding to places they shouldn't be binding. Your ocular fluid starts getting affected. People get yellow or green vision. They get pus from their eyes. They tell me, oh, SARMs don't have any side effects. We'll tell that to the thousands of guys who have cone titties because they took LGD and they only took it for a couple of weeks and their system shut down and they got bitch tits.
Okay, so this, I completely agree with him here. There are far too many people that, don't actually know what they're talking about when they talk about SARMs and they say they're side effect free. The problem is a lot of these people have vested interest, and it's not the case whatsoever. I actually just posted a video yesterday about all of the reported side effects in SARMs in clinical development, actually tested on humans. If you want to go check it out, I would recommend it. It's kind of long, but this video is probably pretty long too. So if you're interested in this stuff, you might want to go watch it, but they're certainly not side effect free. And anyone who tells you that either is trying to mislead you or just doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. So yeah, I definitely agree with him on this point, and I've covered this in depth many times where I talk about SARMs and their potential side effects and the ramifications of them that are understated by a lot of people that have some sort of, I don't know. It's like sometimes it's vested interest, but sometimes it's just the polarized opinions of the sort of like SARMs versus steroids old school crowd, and it's like there's no middle ground where somebody can see that there's therapeutic promise of the SARMs, but can also see the potential drawbacks of them in terms of their, efficacy measures right now. So there has to be some sort of middle ground here. That's kind of like what I've been trying to say in my videos. Okay, so the next point, 5143 to 5217, talks about insulin dosages for Fouad based on his body type.
When you say a small amount, what are you talking about?
Well, it depends on the person.
Let's say 280-pound Fouad Abiad. I want to try it.
Well, okay. So are you an ectomorph or an endomorph or meso? Do you lose fat easily or add fat easily?
I lose fat pretty easily. I'm not an ecto though. I'm like somewhere in the middle.
You're like an ecto-meso?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
No,
so
I'm probably an endo-meso.
Okay, so you're a little bit wider in the center.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So with you, you're going to want to use like a moderate or slow, like Atlantis pre-workout at like 2 or 3 IU. And then post-workout, you're going to want to use 4 or 5 IU of, say, Humalog, something quick. Okay,
so
because
two different kinds together.
2 different kinds. Yeah, you can't use this. If you just use the same kind, and again, if you're a complete ecto, that's completely flipped around.
Okay, so here at this part, I don't know how he's determining these insulin dosages just based on hearing somebody's body type. So, like, for somebody who's really analytical, I would assume that insulin dosages would be based on your own individual carbohydrate intake, first and most importantly, as well as, just as importantly, your individual insulin sensitivity as determined by blood work, or at least at minimum an assessment of glucose tolerance and fasting blood sugar levels and endogenous insulin secretion in response to, you know, a carb dense meal or something like that, to see how long it takes somebody's body to take them from, you know, spiked blood sugar back down to homeostasis as a result of endogenous insulin secretion. So by assessing at least those markers, you should be able to tell, okay, this guy has this many carbs in his diet already, that insulin could potentially be worked around. His insulin sensitivity is, you know, this good or bad based on blood work, based on biomarkers. And this is his, you know, endogenous response to carbohydrates and how his body regulates it and how effective it is at bringing his blood sugar back into under control. So I don't know how you could see somebody and be like, oh, you're a mesomorph, take 5 IUs. Like, that makes no sense to me. So I don't understand why arbitrary amounts of insulin are thrown around. Like, how is this number determined? What is it accomplishing relative to individual needs and insulin sensitivity and tolerance levels? Like, this part makes no sense to me.
I'm going to say this from experience. I'm not going to talk about anybody else.
Okay.
I know when the first look, I haven't done insulin in years.
Right.
If I did insulin tomorrow
Mm-hmm.
on a high carb day, I know I would feel probably crazy in the gym.
Right.
But if I kept doing it, I know after a couple of weeks that feeling would wane and it would probably go away.
Insulin resistance.
I know, but you're telling me that that's all mental. That's
mental.
not, and I'm not getting an
It's
actual.
it's mental and physiological. So it's the insulin resistance coupled with the fact that your cortex is shrinking, coupled with body dysmorphia, coupled with all kinds of stuff. And, you know, a lot of the things that these guys do when they're doing the insulin, okay, they'll do like for every, you know, 1 insulin unit, they'll do 10 grams of carbs, 5 grams of protein, you know, 0.5 glutamine and creatine. That's their little rule of thumb. But they forget that they need flavonoids. They forget they need antioxidants and potassium and phosphorus. You can't even go through oxidative phosphorylation and add muscle tissue in the first place if you don't have those micronutrients. So they don't eat bananas. They don't eat fruit. They don't eat vegetables in wide range of quantity. They're just sitting there pounding, you know, shakes with basically powdered carbs. And that's why.
Okay, so here talking about how insulin seems to give good results at the start, great pumps, great workouts, and then it kind of like quickly falls off. And he says it's insulin resistance coupled with brain shrinkage and body dysmorphia. So I don't really know about the brain shrinkage and body dysmorphia. Like, I think you can tell if your insulin sensitivity is going to shit or not based on your pumps and your, you know, blood sugar control and lots of other measures like I mentioned. But so yeah, I agree with him on the insulin sensitivity. I think that's the main thing to look at here. I'm not really sure what he's getting at with the body dysmorphia thing, because it's like if I look at my blood work and I can see that my health markers are wrecked, like it's not, I don't think it boils down to my body dysmorphia. Like everyone has body dysmorphia that bodybuilds anyways, so I don't really know how that plays into it. But yeah, so like when you start using insulin, you start becoming, if you chronically expose yourself to exogenous insulin, you do severely impact your insulin sensitivity very quickly. And I agree with his point on micronutrient deficiencies as well being a big issue in bodybuilding, especially in the bodybuilding community, because it's one of those things that's macros are so heavily like exaggerated for how that's all that matters. If it fits your macros, blah, 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 the flexible dieting, all this bullshit. It's these guys all completely neglect to hit their micronutrient intake because they just see macros as the thing that determines if you build muscle or burn fat or not. And it's like, yeah, calorie intake and macronutrient allotment is important, but you also need micronutrients to make everything work properly. So I definitely agree with him on this point. And if you're a bodybuilder too, your micronutrient needs are probably even higher because you have an extreme exercise regimen. And increased demands relative to the average male. So, most bodybuilders aren't even hitting their micronutrient needs for like a 160-pound guy, let alone a 250-pound bodybuilder. So that's a huge issue, obviously, as far as the pumps getting away and going away because of insulin resistance and workout quality just going away and going to shit pretty much. Chronically high insulin levels are going to lead to insulin resistance, as I mentioned. So even if your diet's on point, if you're administering exogenous insulin on a daily basis and self-inducing a state of hyperinsulinemia, so you can handle these massive peri-workout drinks full of, Vitargo or like highly branched chain cyclic dextrin and hydrolyzed whey and, EAAs and these concoctions that you have around your workouts, you're going to quickly start hindering your insulin sensitivity and your glucose disposal. So I'm going to post a study here, the effect of sustained physiologic hyperinsulinemia and hyperglycemia on insulin secretion and insulin sensitivity in man. So the subjects, there were 15 young healthy men given constant 96-hour constant infusions of insulin. The subjects were healthy, lean, not obese, not pre-diabetic, not actually diabetic, and everything was good. Normal, healthy subjects. Following 4 days of sustained hyperinsulinemia induced by chronic exposure to insulin, their whole body glucose disposal decreased by 20 to 40%. So these results demonstrate that chronic physiologic hyperinsulinemia, whether created by exogenous insulin administration or by, chronic hyperglycemia caused by excessive intake of carbohydrates, leading to an over-secretion of endogenous insulin, both of these things are going to stress the hell out of your system and cause severely impaired glucose disposal, and your insulin sensitivity basically goes to hell. So this is why if you start taking insulin at first, everything seems great, and then quickly, all of a sudden the pumps suck, workouts aren't as good. You start having perhaps even reactive hypoglycemia, which you weren't having before. These are all things that indicate progressive insulin resistance. So that's something to obviously take note of, and why you should have a blood sugar monitor if you're messing around with insulin to begin with. And ideally, you would just, if you don't understand it, you shouldn't really mess with it in the first place. And most people don't understand it, so I would advise just not messing with it, because most coaches don't know what they're doing with it either. Getting into the next point, 1 hour, 24 seconds to 1 hour, 1 minute and 33 seconds.
So the problem is that if a problem occurs while they're on cycle, because, for example, like I said, everybody's genetically different. So you might have somebody whose aromatase enzyme activity is far greater than someone else's. You give one person one cycle, another person another cycle. This person didn't even need to take a blocker. This one has bitch tits even with the Arimidex every day. So, to parse that, you can't parse that without having that conversation about here's the expected side effects and here's how to deal with them and here's the things you can supplement to deal with. I'll tell you, 2 of the guys who got ready for open class this year took exactly 4 blockers their entire prep. You don't need blockers. They took 4 blockers their entire prep, like
meaning,
4
meaning
pills.
What? 4 pills total?
4 pills total.
I don't understand why then. Why would they only take 4?
Because they don't need it. Because if you run it right and you take the right supplements, you don't even need blockers. You don't need it. The thing is, your body has natural processes to break down estrogen and get it out.
So they took no estrogen blockers?
Almost none. Yeah.
Holy shit.
So at this part, he talks about genetic polymorphisms affecting, how much aromatization you have, and using blockers, which, AIs and SARMs is what he's referring to here. So I completely agree with this as well. And it's one of the more complex and very individual specific things that is like overlooked 99% of the time among bodybuilders probably. So there's guys who have genetic polymorphisms that will impact their sex hormone metabolism. So this is, going to regulate how much your testosterone can either 5-alpha reduce into DHT or it can aromatize into estrogen. Some people, based on genetic polymorphisms, are going to 5-alpha reduce far more DHT than another guy. And there's, this is a large influence on male pattern baldness. In addition to that, some people are going to aromatize far more estrogen than somebody else. It could be the complete opposite from somebody who 5-alpha reduces a significant amount, which has kind of like an antagonizing effect on estrogen. So if you have way more estrogen aromatization than the next guy, this is why two guys could take the same amount of testosterone, for example, and one guy needs an AI to handle that much test and another guy doesn't. Like, I'm sure you know of some guys who, it seems like they can handle, a high dose of test or whatever without any incidents of estrogenic side effects, and then the next guy can't even take his TRT without needing a Arimidex. And this largely boils down to, I wouldn't say it's all genetic, although the polymorphisms do have a significant impact on the way your body metabolizes these hormones at the end of the day, and is a factor that should influence your practices. But ideally you would have administration practices and dietary, requirements and lifestyle and, your body composition, all these things in check to begin with, so then you don't have to worry about it regardless. But like, if you're forced to use an AI just to use like a physiologic amount of testosterone for TRT, like, you're doing something wrong. Something's wrong in your lifestyle or your diet, or you're too fat, or, your administration practice is like you're pinning once a week or once every 2 weeks, and you have way more aromatization than you need to, and you could have been reducing it by a significant amount just by, lowering the volume and splitting into more frequent administrations. There's lots of things that aren't being accounted for that, reduce somebody's need to rely on drugs that you would otherwise shouldn't need when you already have these counteracting regulating mechanisms in the body to deal with this in the first place. So yeah, I agree with him on the genetic thing being important, and it's cheap. You can go get it like a 23andMe test or, any of these like DNA companies, and see kind of where your genetics, put you, and if you're like super prone for gyno or something like that. Like, these are things you can actually figure out for, a couple $100, and it could, make you realize, okay, I need to focus way harder on this, or I need to do this. And it's not necessarily it's things that you should already be doing anyways. The problem is the people without the polymorphisms are just get away with a lot more because their body has better control of these mechanisms, or has a favorable, propensity to do one thing or the other versus somebody else. So, but at the end of the day, the practices should all boil down to the same thing for everyone if you want to optimize your outcomes. So this is an important fact that no one looks at, and I do agree with. Okay, so the next point he makes was at 1 hour, 3 minutes, 17 seconds to 1 hour, 4 minutes, 19 seconds. So at this part, he talks about how to take GH and why testing for GH is a waste of time in blood tests.
Of course.
So there's two ways to take GH, and that's subcutaneous and intramuscular. And okay, I'm going to say that you need to do both. So I do intramuscular before bed. Because I don't actually take GH, by the way. I don't, because that's the only hormone that's still producing for my pituitary gland. I'd like to keep it that way.
Okay.
But GH, when you take it, for example, the guys getting ready for the O this year, I'll just use one of them for example. They were taking, when I took them over, I think they were taking 10 IU a day.
Yeah.
I got them down to 4.
Okay.
You take 2 IU intramuscular at nighttime before bed, and you will get better results from that than you will from splitting into 2 or even 3 doses of subcutaneous GH throughout the day. Because it goes into your muscle tissue and it stays there, and it pushes your IGF up for 30 hours. So you get a much better, more fluid result. That's why when guys get their IGF tested to see if GH is legit or not, I'm like, you're wasting your time, because IGF is in and out, and GH is in and out. You'll never get it tested in time, or even at the right time.
I don't understand his logic of pinning GH intramuscularly if you want what sounds like he wants is a slower bleed of IGF-1, which, if anything, onset would be quicker with IM, not sustained like you would be doing if you got sub-Q. In addition, he literally just said that IGF-1 stays elevated for 30 hours, so I don't really know why he's saying IGF-1 is in and out, because you literally just said that it stays elevated for 30 hours, so it's already kind of contradicting yourself there. The thing is, significant elevations of IGF-1 can be seen within just 6 to 12 hours post-injection, so these levels continue to increase until their dose-dependent saturation point is reached within a week. So even when you're using incredibly high dosages, like as high as 20 IUs of pharma-grade nortotropin, which I'm going to touch on in an upcoming video, where I'm going to cover what dose of GH maxes out IGF-1 levels in humans, and where you're just wasting your money and inducing unnecessary amounts of organ stress and wasting money, significant amounts of money at the same time. If IGF-1 is in and out like this guy is asserting, which it isn't at all, then I don't know what he means by you can't test your GH if it's legit or not. If it's, if it's in and out, he says the opposite, like in the exact same clip. So he says, in the exact same clip, he says IGF-1 is in and out, but then it also is raised for 30 hours. So it's like, for example, I can clearly see here that my IGF-1 was 489 nanograms per milliliter on 3 IUs of GH. So is timing incredibly difficult with GH serum concentrations? Yes, I absolutely agree that it is. And there's like a very specific protocol that needs to be done to try and time it correctly. And there's a lot of factors that influence that and can, skew your results on that. When it comes to testing if your GH is good or not, though, it's not very hard to get an IGF-1 test and see roughly what your quality of your product is. Like IGF-1 levels remain elevated for days. It's not like they are in and out. Like he said, if you pin GH, IGF-1 stays elevated, and you can go get a blood test and see after, a week and dose saturation has occurred. You can see exactly where your IGF-1 levels are and then roughly determine what the quality of your product is. So obviously you need to go get your GH lab tested for purity and dimer if you actually want to see the details about the quality of your product. But in regards to just the amount of GH in the product relative to the dose response, it's pretty easy to get an IGF-1 blood test and see roughly what's going on in terms of IGF-1 levels relative to your GH administration dose. As far as taking GH before sleeping, so he's talking about how taking GH before sleeping is going to help reach deep sleep.
So you do like say 2 IU intramuscular before bed, you go to bed, it's going to improve your rest cycle because it's going to have that delta sleep inducing peptide, which you can also take separately, but it's part of the growth hormone process. You get better sleep, better rest, which is important because that adds more muscle, heals you faster, you have better recovery.
Which, it depends on individual and dose response, as with most things. But as far as in a super physiological context, if we're talking about bodybuilding, then yeah, I agree that pre-bed, one of the dosages pre-bed makes sense. The reason being there's a negative feedback loop with GH and IGF-1. So I'm going to post a study here called Negative Feedback Regulation of Pulsatile Growth Hormone Secretion by Insulin-like Growth Factor 1 Involvement of Hypothalamic Somatostatin. So in this study, IGF-1 was constantly infused and the effect on endogenous GH secretion was assessed. Overall, GH concentrations were suppressed during the IGF-1 infusion by 85%, mainly by attenuating spontaneous GH pulse amplitude, 77% suppression. The apparent GH pulse frequency was attenuated from 7.8 to 4.7 pulses per 24 hours. So there's a negative feedback loop on the growth hormone IGF-1 axis. So it's similar to how, the HPTA works when you have, elevated testosterone and estrogen levels, or your body senses that you have a sufficient amount, it's going to prevent you from making more. And this is, sort of how it regulates itself. So IGF-1 is the primary feedback in this loop for the GH IGF-1 axis, and it acts in a similar mechanism. So the same thing happens when you administer exogenous GH. When you administer GH, your IGF-1 levels increase, obviously. And then the result of that is your body has this feedback loop in place that recognizes IGF-1 is elevated, therefore it doesn't need to produce as much GH. So when your body recognizes that IGF-1 is elevated, it's going to start suppressing GH pulse amplitude in a dose-dependent manner. So if you're using super physiological amounts of GH for bodybuilding purposes, you can assume that your natural secretion is greatly inhibited during sleep, as the negative feedback loop will prevent your body from secreting GH in your sleep like it normally would. So this is where it actually makes sense to use, part of your daily dose pre-bed, because that secretion, that pulse you would get during sleep, you're no longer getting. So, replacing it in that time frame where, recovery is the most critical, it obviously makes sense. Like, what are the most logical times to take your GH if you're inhibiting the feedback loop? It would be when you're sleeping, pre-workout probably, and then maybe like post-workout. Those are like the only times that would make sense to me in terms of if you want to maximize lipolysis, fasted before cardio or training if you train fasted, post-workout as well for IGF-1, muscle growth, and during, before going to sleep in case your sleep pulse is inhibited because of the amount you're using. So it's all dose dependent, individual dependent, but it's like as far as when you use it, the dose you take, it does matter. This reinforces his theory of using it before sleep, but it also contradicts his statement about IGF-1 being in and out of the system, because clearly it isn't. And if it was, then you would want to avoid taking your GH before bed, because that would then, hinder your natural GH secretion while you're sleeping, which isn't the case. Like we can see there's a dose-dependent suppression because of these systemically elevated IGF-1 levels over 24-hour spans. It's not like there's a big spike in IGF-1 and then it crashes down like GH. The IGF-1 remains elevated for more than enough time to inhibit pulsatile amplitude. Okay, so at this part, he talks about taking GH fasted versus not fasted and how much you should take fasted.
You take 2 IU fasted pre-workout, or even 4 IU fasted pre-workout.
Now, what do you mean fasted pre-workout? Because before my workout, I already ate my pre-workout meal. So what do you consider fasted?
Fasted means don't eat before you work out.
Oh.
Because if you don't eat before you work out, and you take that 2 or 4 IU of GH and you go to the gym and you work out, your body's natural follistatin levels will increase by about 40 to 60%. So you will immediately begin throwing on a ton more muscle. As soon as you get done working out, you pound your protein shake, you go home, you eat your meal, whatever it is that you need to do. But if you go to the gym fasted and you train, you're going to go into lipolysis. You're going to pull the fat off yourself. Your follistatin is going to go up. So post-workout, you're going to add more muscle tissue. While you're actually lifting weights, protein synthesis isn't actually happening. What's happening is the destruction of muscle tissue.
So why are people?
So
man, these just keep bringing up more and more questions. I could keep you on here.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not. It's important because I'm going to have to bring you back on like another time, because I don't want to keep you on here for 5 hours. But why do people say that you need to, and I've always said this, that you need to eat before you train. And then a lot of people say like an intra-workout product, if you take any intra-workouts that have essential aminos in them, it's good to take.
So there's plenty of schools of thought, plenty of ways to do it. I'm just saying, if you're going to take growth hormone for the sake of adding muscle tissue and losing fat, that's the way that you want to take it.
He talks about how you should use upwards of 4 IUs fasted before training if you're training fasted and you want maximum lipolysis effects. So this is wrong. 4 IUs at once is a complete waste. And one thing I should say is I 100% agree with lipolysis being a huge factor to your GH being useful or not in a lipolytic context. Like if you're fasted, the effects GH is going to have on fat mobilization in regards to what you're actually burning during your cardio session or your training session, if you're fasted versus not fasted, it definitely matters. Like that, he's definitely correct on. However, as far as the amount at once, there's a ceiling on lipolysis, which he's not accounting for here. And it's much lower than most people think. And this is why a lot of people are putting unnecessary stress on themselves and wasting money and taking too much GH. As you can see here in the following study assessing the pharmacokinetics and acute lipolytic actions of GH, there were significant dose response effects when comparing the incremental area under the curve of both free fatty acids and blood 3-hydroxybutyrate following 0, 1, and 3 micrograms per kilogram of GH administration, whereas there were no differences between the responses following 3 and 6 micrograms per kilogram of GH. So these dosages were administered intravenous. So as far as what milligrams equate to in international units, 1 milligram of somatropin corresponds to 3 IU international units of somatropin. You can see this reinforced in the Norditropin product information pamphlet, or their product information form that they include. So this means that for somebody who weighs 100 kilograms, for example, lipolysis is maxed out at about 300 micrograms of somatropin, which is 0.9 IUs of pharma-grade GH IV. So we need to math out the corresponding subcutaneous dose based on bioavailability and bioactivity comparison data that we have on humans administered HGH, because obviously IV dosages are not representative of what dosages would be via a far more realistic and tolerable method of administration, which is the subcutaneous route. So in one study, the mean estimated availability of subcutaneous injected HGH was shown to be 63% of HGH administered IV after correcting for the differences in the GH dose. Another study found the availability of subcutaneous injected HGH to be about 70% of that of HGH administered IV. So for a 100 kilogram man, like the, very simple example here for, especially in a bodybuilder context, fat loss benefits would be maxed out around 1.5 IU of HGH administered subcutaneously. And that's without even getting into how much of a refractory period cells need before another pulse of exogenous GH can even be useful in a lipolysis context, which I've covered in the past and will probably cover more specifically in a future video. So in this part, he tells Fouad that he can grow all his hair back, and it's because he needs to be taking topical finasteride with minoxidil instead of oral finasteride.
All right. Well, I have one more question before you go. Can you get my hair to grow back?
Yes.
No, you
I
can't.
get it all back.
Are you serious?
Uh-huh. Go to my website.
Okay.
Go to my website. Go to my website and click on research. There's a blog with it says find a steroid or find a tall or something like that. Click on the find a steroid post, and under there I have an entire treatment course with how to mix it, how to make it.
I took finasteride. I took that before.
Orally?
Yeah, it was when I stopped. I was when I stopped taking it. That's when my hair fell out.
No, you don't want to take it orally. So what you want to do is you want to grind up finasteride. There's a process where you grind it up. You mix it with 2% minoxidil. You mix it with like cocoa butter or coconut oil. I prefer cocoa butter because it's a little thicker. You get more of a creamy thing. You about 2 tablespoons of it or a dollop on the palm of your hand, and you just work it into your scalp.
Really?
At bedtime. Work it in until it's all in, and then you go to bed. Do that for 3-4 months, and you'll look like undercover brother.
For those of you who follow my hair loss prevention content, you already know why this is incorrect. If you haven't seen any of my hair loss content without spending the next hour explaining how androgens cause hair loss and linking all the evidence I have backing why finasteride is nothing more than a band-aid, or a small band-aid at that, for bodybuilders who take compounds that don't 5-alpha reduce into DHT, and the effect the inherent androgenicity testosterone has itself on hair follicles, I highly recommend you go watch my other videos on hair loss prevention. But him asserting that a weak concentration of a potassium channel opener, which is minoxidil, and a topical 5-alpha reductase inhibitor are going to regrow a nearly bald scalp that has experienced years of miniaturization, calcification, and fibrosis is ridiculous, to say the least. Would you grow some of your hair back? Maybe, but is it going to be anything substantial at the end of the day? No, it's not. And in his post, he asserts topical application does not bind to the prostate, but rather to the androgens around the area applied. This is not how finasteride works whatsoever. It's a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. It's not an anti-androgen. By inhibiting 5-alpha reductase on the scalp, yes, you can inhibit a decent bit of 5-alpha reduction of testosterone into DHT locally. However, even orally, finasteride can only knock out 70% of your systemic DHT, and the scalp DHT suppression is less impressive. Topically, even if you can inhibit that much DHT, like assuming best case scenario, which there's no data to back this, you still have a residual 30% plus of your DHT, plus all of the testosterone in your body. And if you're a bodybuilder using testosterone dosages multiple fold higher than the physiologic amount a natural would produce, that is still more than sufficient enough to cause miniaturization of hair follicles. All you're doing is taking a small chunk of your androgen load out of the body. And this is small compared to everything else you're doing as a bodybuilder. As a bodybuilder, if you're using DHT derivatives, 19-nors, and other compounds that do not 5-alpha reduce into DHT, and even if they do 5-alpha reduce, they don't 5-alpha reduce into more androgenic metabolites. By using finasteride, you're getting fractional protection from DHT that would have otherwise 5-alpha reduced from testosterone into DHT, but you're doing absolutely nothing in preventing hair loss from the other androgens you're putting in your body at dosages that skyrocket your overall androgen load and can cause the exact same downstream cascade of events that lead to hair follicle miniaturization. So slam yourself with, if you slam yourself with a bunch of Masteron how much is finasteride going to protect you? It's going to protect you zero. There's going to be no protection whatsoever. It's a 5-AR inhibitor. Yes, it does reduce the androgen load in your body to some extent, but in somebody who's natural, is this sufficient to stave off hair loss? In some cases, yeah, it's sufficient. But for a bodybuilder who's literally taking a super physiological amount of testosterone in addition to high doses of other androgens, which can cause the exact same cascade of events, you have no protection from any of this stuff. Like you're not going to do anything with a low dose of minoxidil and a topical 5-AR inhibitor. So no, he's not going to, reverse his hair loss completely. And I don't know how he could assert that based on what he's taking. Even if this guy was natural, the likelihood that he could reverse his hair loss with a topical 5-AR inhibitor and a low dose of minoxidil is extremely low. So overall, some of the stuff this guy says I do agree with. And his general message is, less is more. Don't take more drugs than you need. Focus on micronutrient intake. All these things are commendable and I do agree with. And, oftentimes less is more. A lot of guys don't want to believe that, but it's true in a lot of cases. If you reduce the stress on your organs in the long run, you're going to get better growth outcomes. And oftentimes these counter-regulating mechanisms in the body are designed to prevent you from growing more on purpose in the presence of these super physiological dosages of androgens, which can in turn actually screw you over if you use excessively high amounts, because you're going to crank things like myostatin through the roof, or you're going to use unnecessarily high amounts of growth hormone that, induce, insulin resistance, and then with no additional benefit in terms of hypertrophy or, hypothetical hyperplasia and these things like that. The dose response and the ceiling of maximum benefit relative to side effect and risk profile oftentimes is, completely misunderstood. And this guy seems to have a decent message in terms of, reducing risk, maximizing outcomes, focusing on micronutrient intake and not just macronutrients. But, like I covered in the video, there are a lot of things I disagree with that he stated as facts that I feel needed to be clarified. So I felt like a video was warranted, and obviously it was highly requested by you guys. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned something. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe. Check out my blog, moreplates.com. Drop a comment in the comment section below. It helps the algorithm a lot. Check out the podcast link description below if you want to drop a 5-star rating. That helps a lot too in terms of the algorithm. So I appreciate when you guys do that. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.